Hey y'all, it's me, Dri. So today I want to talk about something that I'm actually sitting inside of this week. And that is, what happens when your healing suddenly goes quiet. Because for years now, my healing has been very loud. There seemed to always be something asking for my attention, always something I needed to understand, always something I needed to process. There were patterns I needed to recognize, and I had wounds that I needed to trace back to their origin. Reactions I had that I needed to understand, and boundaries that I needed to learn how to hold. There has always been internal work to do. And for a very long time now, I have to say that internal work, that was absolutely necessary because I needed to fully understand why certain dynamics felt familiar to me. And I needed to learn the difference between my intuition and my fear. I needed to learn how to trust myself and how to listen to my body. I needed to learn how to recognize distortion and how to stop abandoning myself just because, because somebody else's behavior created a reaction inside of me. And I guess when you spend years doing this kind of work, you get really used to looking inward at yourself. Because if something happens in my external world, I have almost automatically turned inward. I do that so that I could figure out what that situation was showing me, or why did it affect me, or I'd ask, what am I supposed to learn from it? I'd analyze if it was an old pattern. I'd ask if this was something I needed to heal from. And that kind of self-reflection, it changed my life. But this week, I guess I found myself sitting somewhere different because I've recently encountered something I recognized. And I saw the distortion. I saw the pattern. But instead of immediately inserting myself into it, instead I let it play out. I did not try to stop it. I did not try to expose it. And I didn't try to convince anybody else to see what I was seeing. I wasn't trying to control the outcome. I was not chasing clarity because, I already had the clarity. I simply chose not to participate. And when I did that, the pattern, it completed itself without me. And then crickets. Nothing. And that's the part that I wasn't expecting, because there have been times when something like this would have created weeks of internal processing for me. I would have analyzed it completely. I would have questioned myself. I would have tried to understand every single person involved and their perspective, and I would have looked for the lesson. I also would have searched for the wound underneath my reaction and tried to figure out what I was supposed to do with all of it. But this week, I keep looking around inside myself, waiting for the next place or the next piece of my internal work to appear, and nothing is appearing. There isn't some massive revelation coming behind the situation. There isn't another layer underneath it that I just can't find. And there isn't some unanswered question keeping me attached to the experience. I don't know. I see what I see. I know what I know. And there's this strange, quiet space behind it. And it's making me start to wonder, I don't know. I wonder if maybe this is what it feels like when the internal work starts working. And I don't mean that I'm finished healing. I don't mean that. We all know that healing is not linear. But I'm beginning to wonder if maybe this is what it feels like to be integrated. I don't think that human beings ever arrive at some magical finish line where nothing affects us anymore and there's nothing left to learn. I don't think that at all. That isn't what I'm talking about. What I mean is reaching a place where every experience no longer requires an excavation. A place where I don't automatically need to take something apart just because it happened. And a place where maybe I don't need another breakthrough. Because maybe there isn't another breakthrough here. Maybe I already have all the information I need. And it feels strange to me because when I spent years doing this internal work, I became very good at looking inward at myself. I learned how to examine myself thoroughly. I learned how to recognize patterns. I'm really good at that. I learned how to trace reactions backwards. I learned how to sit with very difficult truths, and I learned how to ask myself very hard questions. And I learned how to take responsibility for those answers when they belong to me. And all of those skills, they were absolutely necessary. But right now, I'm starting to ask myself something I've never really, considered before. And that is what happens when there isn't anything to analyze today. What happens when I recognize the pattern before becoming part of it? And what happens when I trust myself to what happens when I trust myself the very first time? Or what do I do with all this extra energy now? Because I'm going to say it, survival, that requires an enormous amount of energy. Healing requires an enormous amount of energy too. There have been years of my life where so much of my capacity was being used for the internal work. So much of my capacity went to understanding, processing, regulating, rebuilding. What else? Learning and unlearning, grieving, integrating. And now I'm starting to notice that some of all that capacity is coming back to me now. And that's the part that feels very formative to me, because I don't quite know what to do with all this capacity yet. I'm standing in this strange transition where I can feel the work moving from the inside of me to the outside. And I'm realizing in that those are two very different kinds of work. Internal work that has taught me how to trust myself. But the external work that asks, what am I going to trust myself to do? The internal work that taught me boundaries. But the external work that asks, what am I going to build with those boundaries in place now? And the internal work developed my discernment for sure, but the external work asks me to actually choose something. And the internal work helped me find my voice, that's for sure. But the external work that asks me where I want to use my voice. And the internal work taught me not to ever abandon myself. And now, I guess the external work seems to be asking, okay, so now, where do you want to take yourself? And I don't know, I guess I don't completely know the answer yet. And maybe that's why this feels like such a strange place, because for a long time, I knew what the assignment was. For a long time, the assignment has been to heal. The assignment has been to understand, and it has been to get myself back. And now I guess I'm beginning to realize that getting myself back, that cannot remain my assignment forever, right? Because at some point, I actually have to do something with the person I have fought this hard to recover. And that changes the questions for me, because for a long time, my questions were, what do I need to heal? And now I find myself asking, what do I want to build? For a long time, the question was, why does this keep happening to me? But now I'm asking instead, what would I like to happen next to me? And for a long time, I would ask myself what pattern I am repeating. And now there's this completely different question sitting in front of me. And that's, what experience have I never had? Because so much of my capacity was being used somewhere else. And I don't have all of those answers yet either. And I guess that's what's making this time different for me. This isn't me standing on the other side telling y'all what external living looks like. I'm standing at the beginning of it. I know how to go inward, but going outward is what feels brand new. There was a season when looking backward at things saved me, saved my life even, because I needed context. I needed understanding. And I needed to make sense of things that happened to me. I also needed to understand myself inside of those experiences. But right now I'm realizing that if I continue treating every new experience like evidence that there must be another wound somewhere inside of me that I need to heal, then I may never actually leave the healing room. And I don't want to live there forever. There has to be room for ordinary life, right? There has to be room for something not working without me immediately turning it into an assignment. And there has to be room for experiences that simply give me information and not a midlife crisis. And there has to be room now for me to notice something, make a choice, and then continue moving forward, because that creates space. And it creates a lot more space than I'm used to having. Because when so much of my energy has historically been directed towards surviving something or healing from something, where does all that energy go when it no longer has that job anymore? And that's the question that I'm sitting with right now. And I think the answer might be the energy goes outward. It goes into creating, into building, into participating, into community, into work, into experiences, and into things that challenge me for reasons that I have absolutely nothing to do with my past. Now that energy can go into discovering what I actually enjoy, when enjoyment isn't competing with my survival. And I can put it into what I want when my choices are exclusively being organized around what I need to protect myself from. All that feels like an entirely different relationship with life. And I'm not standing here pretending I know what to do with it, obviously, because I don't. I do know how to heal, and I know how to examine. I know how to reflect, and I know how to survive. And I've gotten really, really good at rebuilding. All of those muscles have gotten a lot of exercise from me in this life. But building outward, that asks for something different, doesn't it? It asks me to enter life without knowing exactly what will happen. It asks me to take a risk. It asks me to try things, to meet people, to create opportunities, and to make decisions that aren't only about protecting the person I became, but actually expanding her. And I think that might actually require a different kind of courage than what I'm used to. Because when I was healing, there was usually something behind me giving me direction. Because I knew what I was trying to understand, and I knew what I was trying to change, and I knew what I didn't want to repeat. And my past, that gave me a reference point. But moving forward, that requires me to stop defining my direction exclusively by what I'm moving away from. Now I have to decide what I'm moving towards, I guess. And I don't know, what you're moving away from and what you're moving towards, those are not the same thing. Because I can know exactly what I don't want and still have to discover what I do want. And I can know what kind of environments I won't remain in and still have to discover the environments where I can flourish. I can know what kind of relationships I won't participate in and still have an entire world of connection left to experience. And I guess I can know who I refuse to become again and still have absolutely no idea who else I might become in the process. And that's exactly where I am. So maybe this is external work. Maybe this is it. Not abandoning everything I learned internally, but now actually applying it. Because when I look back at the internal work I've already done, I can see that none of it was wasted. It was all with purpose. I learned boundaries so I could carry them into the relationships I can now build. I developed discernment so I can use it when opportunities now appear. And I built self-trust so I could eventually take risks without needing somebody else to guarantee the outcome. And I found my voice so I could create something with it. And then I learned how to remain connected to myself so that I could enter the world without losing myself inside of it. So maybe all of that is the point of the internal work. It's just preparing me for my actual life and getting the internal work that was never supposed to become my life. And I think for the first time, I'm starting to understand that. I've spent a really long time healing, but I'm getting maybe healing eventually becomes less about how much further inward you can go and more about how much wider your life can become because you went inward in the first place. So this is where I'm standing. I'm in the doorway. And this week I can feel that there isn't another giant internal assignment screaming for my attention. There isn't something I need to solve before I'm allowed to move. There is just a lot of space. There's capacity that used to belong to my survival. Capacity that used to belong to my confusion. And capacity that used to belong to my recovery. But now I'm learning what it feels like for that capacity to belong to just me. Maybe for the first time, I don't need to have the answers. Maybe this is where I become curious. Maybe this is where I experiment. Maybe now I get to find out what the next chapter of my life looks like, especially when it doesn't begin with another answer. Maybe my life begins with possibility, because this is what I know from all of the internal work that came before this moment. I know how to listen to myself now. I know how to recognize when something is asking me to abandon myself. And I know how to recognize distortion without needing to become a part of it. I know that I can allow a pattern to complete without following it to the end. And I know how to return back to myself when life knocks me off center. Those are all the things I learned. Now it's time to live with them. So maybe this is everything that happens when healing finally goes quiet. Maybe I don't immediately feel the silence by searching for another thing to fix. Maybe I'm just supposed to let the silence be there. Maybe I start paying attention to what it is making room for, because right now I'm not asking myself, what else do I need to heal? Right now I'm asking myself, what do I want to do with the life I fought this hard to get back? And like I said, I don't have these answers yet, but for the first time, I think I have enough space. I have enough capacity to find these answers out, right? What could really go wrong? Except everything. But no, that's just a joke. I have the confidence. I know I have the wherewithal. And now it's just, I'm guessing, a matter of landing in the right places at the right time and seeing what this external life really has to offer. And that's what I got for you guys today. So remember, where there is love, there is light. I'll see y'all again real soon.